Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear student, today I will talk about the physiology of the pain. This is the first part of the pain sensation. In the second part, we will discuss how the pain sensation can be controlled through what's called the pain control system. Today, we will talk about the pain sensation. First, let us to understand what's meant by pain sensation. Simply, the pain sensation is unpleasant, discomfortable sensation, which, when severe enough, it is usually accompanied with emotional suffering. The pain sensation is a protective mechanism because it is a sign or warning signal for the presence of the tissue damage. This sign or warning signal for the tissue damage allow us to make a reflex to get rid of the painful stimulus, because the painful stimulus or the injurious stimulus or the noxious stimulus which produce pain usually produce what's called tissue damage. So the pain sensation is a protective mechanism. Okay, this protective mechanism indicate the presence of any of the tissue damage anywhere in our body. So this is what's meant by pain sensation and the importance of the pain sensations. The next point, what are the types of pain or how we can classify the pain? We can classify the pain by one of two ways. The first, its origin. If it comes from the skin, this is a cutaneous pain. If it comes from the deep tissue, this is a deep pain. If it comes from the viscera, this is called visceral pain. So the cutaneous pain coming from the skin and cutaneous tissue or subcutaneous tissue, and usually it is present in the form of a breaking pain or burning pain. On the other hand, the deep pain is a pain coming from the deep structures like the skeletal muscles and joints, and this is usually dull aching pain or throbbing pain. The visceral pain is the pain coming from the viscera, like the internal organs, like the stomach, and usually in the form of a colicky pain or dull aching pain. This is the types of pain according to what? According to its origin. The second way or the second method by which we can classify the pain according to its mechanism or its cause. If the pain is due to or induced by activation of the pain receptors, this is called physiological pain. But if the pain is due to damage of the pathway of the pain without activation of the pain receptors, this is called pathological pain. Again, the first one is called nociceptive pain or physiological pain, and this is called by stimulation of the pain receptors by the tissue damage, like in a case of inflammation. On the other hand, the pathological pain is called neuropathic pain, and this is caused by damage of the nerve pathways, like a case of sciatica, without activation. Don't forget, without activation of the pain receptors. So, our lecture discuss mainly how to perceive the pain. This diagram shows us how we can perceive the pain. When we apply a painful stimulus to the pain receptors, this will generate a nerve impulse which travel along a specific pathway for the pain sensation to reach what is called the primary somatic sensory area in the cerebral cortex to produce pain sensation. So the pain perception consists of two parts. The first part, this is the activation of the pain receptors, and the second, transmission of the nerve impulse along a specific sensory pathways to the cortex to perceive the pain sensation. So the pain receptors, okay, are a free nerve ending or specific nerve ending, free nerve ending. And we can classify the pain receptors into three types. The first one, according to the adequate stimulus or their adequate stimulus, or according to their types, their mean stimulus. The first one, this is a mechanical pain receptors which respond to strong mechanical stimuli like cutting of the skin. And when the stimulus which activate the pain receptors is a thermal stimulus, okay, like excessive heating more than 45 degrees centigrade or below than 10 degrees centigrade, this is called thermal pain receptors or thermosensitive pain receptors. If the pain receptors are activated by the presence of or respond to a noxious chemical stimuli, this is called chemical pain receptors. So the pain receptors may be mechanical pain receptors, respond to mechanical stimuli, thermal pain receptors, and chemical pain receptors. The last one, or the fourth one, this is polymodal pain receptors, and this polymodal pain receptors respond to a combination of mechanical, thermal, and chemical stimuli to respond to all kinds of stimuli, provided that this stimuli produce what's called tissue damage. This is the types of the pain receptors. What about the stimulation or mechanism of stimulation of the pain receptors? This diagram, okay, help us to understand how the pain receptors can be stimulated. So if you apply chemical stimuli or mechanical noxious stimuli or thermal noxious stimuli to the tissue, this will produce tissue damage. This tissue damage will produce a pain-producing substance. This pain-producing substance, two groups, first class and second class. The first class include histamine, potassium, serotonin, and bradykinin, but the second class, prostaglandin E2, leukotrienes, and substance B. The first class, okay, the first class directly stimulate the pain receptors, but the second class sensitize the pain receptors. What's meant by sensitize the pain receptors? It means it lowers the threshold of the pain receptors to the painful or noxious stimuli. So simply, okay, the noxious stimuli, either chemical or mechanical or thermal, produce tissue damage. This tissue damage will release a substance called pain-producing substance or compounds, which are two categories or two classes. The first one, like histamine, bradykinin, serotonin, and potassium and hydrogen, this will directly stimulate the pain receptors. On the other hand, the second class, like the prostaglandin E2 leukotrienes, this sensitize the pain receptors for the action of the first group. This diagram shows how the tissue injury release a group of substance and activate the pain receptors to activate the pathway for pain sensation. Number 4, in the pain receptors, what about their distribution? The distribution of the pain receptors in our organs or in our tissue is not equal. Okay, but some organs or some areas in our body are rich in pain receptors, like the skin, like the periosteum, like the wall of the arteries, like the surface of the joints, like the dura of tentorium cerebelli. So any pain coming from these regions will be sharp and well localized due to high density of what? Of the pain receptors. On the other hand, some organs contain a few number of pain receptors like the deep tissue and viscera. So any pain coming from these areas will be poorly localized due to low density of the pain receptors. Also, some organs contains no pain receptors like the brain, like the parenchyma of the liver and the kidney and the lung. So these structures are called pain insensitive structures. So no pain perceived from these organs. Okay, if you perceive pain from the liver, from the kidney, this is not from the parenchyma of the organ, but from the blood vessels present in the organs, from the capsule of the organs, from from not from the parenchyma, but from what? From the blood vessels and from the capsule or the covering, like the peritoneum, like the pleura, and so on. This is the stimulation. Sorry, the distribution of the pain receptors. What about the adaptation? Normally, the pain receptors are non-adapting pain receptors. Non-adapting means they never adapt to the presence of noxious stimuli. This will make continuous information of the central nervous system about the presence of the noxious stimuli or injurious stimuli, and this will make our body to keep trying to remove the damaging stimulus or to get away from it. Okay, this is the adaptation. What about the threshold? The threshold for the pain receptors is very high compared to other receptors. So the pain receptors need a sufficient degree of tissue damage to be stimulated. Again, the pain receptors Okay, we discussed the structure of the pain receptors, the types of the pain receptors according to their stimuli, the adaptation, the threshold. Also, we discussed the mechanism of stimulation of the pain receptors. The next point, this is the pathways for pain sensation. The pathway of pain sensations, we can classify them into two pathways. The first one, this is the fast pain pathway, or what's called new spinothalamic tract. Okay, starting, any pathway for any sensations, three order neurons. The first one start with the receptors, and here the receptors for pain are a free nerve ending. Okay, the nerve fibers is A delta nerve fibers and terminate in lamina 1 at the posterior horn of the spinal cord. The second order neuron coming from the lamina 1 and cross to the opposite side and ascend as a lateral spinothalamic tract, which join the ventral spinothalamic tract in this region. Okay, this is the lateral and this is the ventral, form what's called in the brainstem spinal meniscus. And the second order neuron will terminate at the posteroventral nucleus of thalamus, or BVNT. The third order neuron starting from the BVNT, and their axons will form what's called sensory radiations, which terminate in the primary somatic sensory area. Okay, this is the first order neuron, second order neuron, and third order neuron for the fast pain pathway. Don't forget that the chemical transmitter which transmits the signals from the first to the second at the level of the dorsal horn of spinal cord here is called glutamate. This is the glutamate. This is a neurotransmitter for the fast pain. Okay. Also, don't forget this pathway for pain sensation will be a sharp, fast. Why? Because it is transmitted by A delta nerve fibers. Well localized because it terminates at the primary somatic sensory area 1 in a specific region in our cortex. This is again the pathway for the fast pain, the new spinothalamic tract. The first order neuron start with the receptors, then A delta fibers, and in lamina 1 of the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. The second order neuron starting from lamina 1, then cross to the opposite side, ascend as a new spinothalamic tract and spinal meniscus, and in posteroventral nucleus of thalamus. The third, from the posteroventral nucleus of thalamus to the sensory radiations and in primary somatic sensory area. Don't forget the chemical transmitter here. Okay, at the central end of A delta fibers is the glutamine. What about the slow pain pathway? The slow pain pathway is called paleospinothalamic tract. This paleospinothalamic tract, the first order neuron start with the receptors, free nerve ending, then the C fibers. The C fibers are slow nerve fibers, okay, and it will end or terminate at the lamina 3 or lamina 2 and the 3 at the level of the SGR, at the level of the dorsal horn of spinal cord, and this is called substantia gelatinosa of Rolandi, or SGR. This is the first. The second order neuron coming from the SGR and cross to the opposite side and will terminate, will form what's called paleospinothalamic tract, paleospinothalamic, spinomesencephalic or spinotectal, and spinoreticular. It terminates at reticular formation of the brainstem in medulla and pons. This is called the spinoreticular tract. Terminate at what is called the back area. Back area means the gray area or around the aqueduct of Sylvius, or periaqueductal gray area around the aqueduct of Sylvius, which connected the third with the fourth ventricle in the midbrain. And this is called the spinomesencephalic or spinotectal tract. Also, they terminate a non-specific thalamic nuclei of the thalamus, and this is called paleospinothalamic tract. So this is the second order neuron. The third order neuron from the reticular formation in the brainstem and the non-specific thalamic nuclei, it will terminate in all cortical areas. So the pain carried by the slow pain pathway is a slow transmitted by C fibers. and it activates all the cortex to produce what's called arousal state or conscious state or alert state. And also it will end in the reticular formation, and you know reticular formation in the centers. The reticular formation is the center for many for many functions or visceral functions or autonomic functions of the cardiovascular system, respiration, and so on. So the autonomic reactions associated with the pain are due to the connections between the slow pain pathway and the reticular formation in the brainstem. Okay, this is, and don't forget the last point, the neurotransmitter here between the first and second order neuron at the level of SGR, this is a substance P. Okay, this is a slow pain pathway or paleo-spinothalamic tract. Don't forget the C fibers, lamina 2 and 3 or SGR. The SGR will form spino-reticular, spinotectal, or mesencephalic paleo-spinothalamic tract. The third order neuron terminate in all cortical areas of the brain. And don't forget the chemical transmitter here, this is substance B. This is the main difference between the new spinothalamic tract and the paleo-spinothalamic tract. The first one rapidly informs your CNS about the presence of the injurious, but the second continuously informs your CNS about the presence of the tissue damage. The first one is well localized and fast response. The second is poor localized, produce a strong arousal state due to potent activation of the reticular activating system, and also it initiate emotional and autonomic reactions. This is the difference between the fast pain and slow pain. The fast pain usually coming from the skin, the slow from the skin, deep tissue, and viscera. The first one is a pricking, the second is burning. The onset or the start for the fast pain start within 0.1 second after stimulation, but the second one or the slow one start within 1 to 2 or more than 1 second after stimulation. This is a very short, has a very short time, 1 second. This is a long time, few minutes. This is well localized, diffuse, transmitted by A delta, by C, transmitted by new spinothalamic, by paleo-spinothalamic. Its center, this is the cortex, and this center, the thalamus. The chemical transmitter, the glutamate, the chemical transmitter is the substance B. What about the reactions of the body to pain? We have many reactions, okay, of the body to the pain sensation. We can, sorry for this interruption. Again, these reactions, okay, include 4 main type of reactions. The first one somatic, the second autonomic, emotional, and hyperalgesia. What about the somatic reactions? Somatic reactions in the form of flexion withdrawal reflex, and it occur in cutaneous pain. Okay, it is a protective reactions. What's meant by protective reactions? Protective reactions means it will get rid of the injurious stimulus. Okay, it is a prepotent. What's meant prepotent? Prepotent means inhibit any reflex occurring at the same time. For example, if you are doing something like reading, like writing, and so on, and one of your colleagues break your skin with a pen, you will stop all the actions you do or you did, okay, and withdraw your body away from the injurious stimulus. So this withdrawal reflex inhibit all reflexes occurring at the same time. That's what's meant by powerful or prepotent. The autonomic reactions may be in the form of sympathetic or parasympathetic. The mild and the moderate pain coming from the skin, usually associated with activation of the sympathetic in the form of increased heart rate, increased arterial blood pressure, and this is called pressor reactions. On the other hand, the severe cutaneous pain and deep pain and visceral pain are usually associated with depressor reaction or activation of the parasympathetic in the form of bradycardia, hypotension, nausea, vomiting, constriction of the pupil, and so on. This is the autonomic reactions. What about the emotional or psychogenic in the form of and anxiety, fear, crying, irritability, depressions, and so on. Okay, these reactions vary from one person to another and vary in the same person according to his emotional state. If he is irritable, the degree of the feeling of the pain will be high, and this will augment feeling of the pain. If he is exposed to strong emotional excitement, this may block the pain feeling or the feeling of the pain. The last one, this is the cutaneous hyperalgesia. Again, the first reaction in the somatic, second autonomic, the third, this is the emotional. The last one, this is the cutaneous, and this cutaneous means hyperalgesia. Hyper means increased, algesia means pain. It means increase the sensitivity of the skin to pain sensation. We have two types. The first one, this is a primary, and second one in the secondary. Look for this diagram. This is the area of inflammation, and this is the area of redness or red area, and this is the healthy skin around it. This is the site of primary hyperalgesia, and this site of secondary hyperalgesia. Secondary area of secondary hyperalgesia and the area of primary hyperalgesia. What is the difference between them? This is present in red inflamed area, and this present in the healthy skin around it. The primary start within 30 to 60 minutes after the injury and lasts for several hours or days after injury. But the secondary is of a short period than the primary. In this primary, when you apply non-painful stimuli like the touch to the red area, this will produce pain. So in this case, in the primary, or in case of primary hyperalgesia, the non-painful produce pain. But the secondary, when you apply a mild painful stimuli, this will produce severe pain. Okay, this is the primary. How we can explain the primary and secondary? The primary can be explained by reduction of the threshold of the pain sensation due to what's called local axon reflex. But the secondary hyperalgesia can be explained by a theory called Convergence-Facilitation theory. Convergence-Facilitation theory. Convergence-Facilitation theory, no lowering of the threshold of the pain, but the impulse from the area of the primary hyperalgesia facilitate or increase the excitability of those coming from the secondary. So the signals coming from the secondary hyperalgesia region will be felt more severe or more strong. This is a local axon reflex. Okay, here, this is a local axon reflex. Okay, the signal activates the cell body or dorsal root ganglion and pass and return back through what's called somatic antidromic fibers to activate substance B or to release some substance to reduce the threshold of the pain receptors or to activate the pain receptors. The convergence projection, the convergence facilitation theory, this is in this explain this theory, explain the secondary. The mild painful applied to the secondary area, okay, will be facilitated by a signal from the primary. Okay, so the mild painful will be felt as a severe painful stimulus. The last one, or the last type of the pain, this is a referred pain. Referred pain means pain felt away from its original site. Okay, usually all visceral pain or pain coming from the viscera are referred. They are felt in somatic structures away from the viscera. Okay, and the deep pain may be referred, but the cutaneous pain never referred. The site of referral depends upon what? The site of referral is determined by what's called the dermatomal rule. What's meant by dermatomal rule? Dermatomal rule means the pain from the viscera is referred to the somatic structure, skin or deep tissue, which were developed in the same embryonic segment or supplied by the same dorsal root. Okay. So what about what is the cause for this abnormal site? You know, the appendix, for example, the appendix, okay, and the skin around the umbilicus, both of them are supplied by the dorsal root of spinal nerve number thoracic segment number 10. Thoracic segment number 10. So, and why the viscera or the appendix is below the umbilicus? This is due to migration of the viscera, during embryogenesis or organogenesis. This is example for the sites of the referred pain. The pain of the heart usually referred to the left shoulder, the inner surface of the left arm, forearm, and the little finger. The appendix, the skin around the umbilicus. The gallbladder to the right hypochondrium and the right shoulder. The ureteric pain, the pain coming from the ureter or from the kidney to the inguinal region and to the to the inguinal region. Okay, how we can explain this kind of pain? This is explained by a convergence projection theory. What's meant by convergence projection theory? Briefly, this theory states that the afferent coming from the viscera and this coming from the skin converge to the same nerve center, okay, at the level of SGR or thalamus or reticular formation or the cerebral cortex. Okay, again, this theory states that any signals coming from carrying the pain or any pain signals coming from the viscera or from the skin converge to the same nerve center. Okay, but so the finally terminate in one cortical neuron, and the brain project this pain to the site of the skin, not to the site of the viscera. Why? Because the brain or our brain usually accustomed or used to receive pain from what? From the skin, not from the viscera. Okay, this is the convergence projection theory. So the afferent pain fibers from the skin and the viscera converge on the same neuron of SGR and finally stimulate the same cortical neuron. The cortex project or feel the pain as it coming from the skin, not from the viscera, because the sensory cortex is accustomed to receive pain from the skin, not from the viscera. Convergence may occur at the level of SGR, may occur at the level of thalamus or sensory cortex. The last point, this is a neuropathic pain or pathological pain, and this is a kind of chronic pain due to damage of the nerve fibers present in the peripheral nerve or CNS. It may be central, like in a thalamic infarction, and may be peripheral, like in a case of nerve compression by sciatica or neuropathy or neuralgia, and may be mixed, like in a case of post-herpetic neuralgia. This pain is a burning pain or shooting pain, occur in bouts or paroxysms or in attacks, and partially treated with opiates. Okay, the main difference between the neuropathic pain and nociceptive pain, this is the nociceptive pain, or this is the physiological pain, or this is the protective pain. Here, the pain receptors are activated, but here, no activation for the pain receptors, no activation for pain receptors. But the afferent present in the peripheral nervous system, or the afferent or the nerve fibers present in the CNS are damaged. Okay, so this will produce what's called neuropathic pain. So this is a pathological pain, and this is a nociceptive pain. Dear student, I would like to thank you for your listening for my lecture, and see you inshallah the next time in a next or future lectures. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.